July 18th, 1983. Deep in Oregon's Cedar Valley National Forest, a ranger named Tom Weaver walks up to a campsite that should be noisy with breakfast. 2 steaming cups of coffee sit on a picnic table. A folded trail map lies open to Bear Creek. A Kodak camera rests on a chair. No people, no movement. The permit on the post lists 2 names: Rachel Martin, 26, a geotechnical engineer, and Lucas Reed, 28, a travel photographer. They were due out that morning after 4 days in the woods. Their Jeep Cherokee is locked, packed, and parked 100 meters away. The keys aren't missing. Nothing is smashed. The scene looks paused, not abandoned. This isn't a horror story. It's a disappearance. A cold case born in daylight. Inside the Jeep, investigators will later find a map marked in red along the creek and a notebook entry from July 16th. Heavy rain tonight. Water sounds faster than usual. A fisherman reports seeing a moving light by the water on the 17th. Overnight storms close the access road. By the time the search begins, the forest has washed over what little trace remained. 2 sets of prints lead south and vanish at the edge of Bear Creek. Too quiet. Too perfect, the county sheriff notes in his log. The discovery is simple. The questions are not. Where did Rachel and Lucas go? Why does a warm breakfast sit on an empty table? And how does a well-marked, careful trip end in silence? As we move forward, we'll open the Jeep, the map, and the half-shot roll of film. If you're into deep-dive timelines and evidence-led breakdowns, hit like, subscribe, and leave your take in the comments. Flash flood, wrong turn, or something else? Your theory might shape the next chapter of this case. September 10th, 1981. It's a quiet Thursday morning in western Montana, the air thin and damp after a night of heavy rain. Forest Ranger Daniel Reed drives the back road through Silver Ridge National Forest, part of his weekly patrol through the Bitterroot Mountains. The trail is slick, and mist drifts low between the trees. Around 9 a.m. he spots a small clearing near the Creek Bend campground, a registered site for 2 campers. But what catches his attention isn't movement. It's the stillness. A picnic table sits in the middle of the clearing. On it, a metal coffee pot still warm to the touch, 2 mugs half full, and 2 blankets spread neatly across folding chairs that haven't been put away. The smell of wet pine mixes with the faint scent of coffee. But there's no one there. No voices, no footsteps, no sign of anyone packing up. The camping permit tacked to the post lists 2 names: Hannah Cole, 22, a University of Washington student studying environmental science, and Ethan Price, 24, a freelance photographer from Seattle. They had registered for a 5-day stay, from September 6th through the 10th, planning to leave that morning. Reed looks around. The ground is soft with mud, but the footprints near the fire pit have already blurred from rain. No signs of a struggle, no broken branches, no overturned chairs. The site feels frozen, as if time simply stopped a few hours ago. 100 meters away, their Jeep Wagoneer sits parked in the gravel lot. The doors are locked, the keys missing, but everything inside is untouched. There are jackets folded on the back seat, a small cooler of food, a radio, a guidebook for local trails, and 2 maps. Reed calls in a possible missing person report at 9:47 a.m. When deputies arrive that afternoon, they find nothing to suggest panic. The tent poles are still in the ground, but the tent fabric itself is missing. The campfire has gone out naturally. The ground is damp but undisturbed. The investigators check for animal tracks, bears, elk, or wolves, but find none near the site. As the rain begins again, Sheriff Raymond Burke orders the perimeter photographed. "It's too clean," he says quietly to one of his deputies. "Like they stood up, walked off, and never came back." Inside the Jeep, Burke finds 2 backpacks, one open, one zipped. Inside are notebooks, maps, and a small camera bag marked with Ethan's initials. In Hannah's pack, a weather journal sits on top of a field guide. Her last entry, dated September 8th, reads, "Water sounds louder tonight. Might be the stream shifting." The sheriff notes that line in his report. He also notes the small thermos, still half full of coffee, that tests lukewarm even hours later. It means one thing. Whatever happened likely occurred that same morning, not days earlier. By dusk, the area is taped off. Search and rescue units arrive from Hamilton and Missoula. They find 2 sets of boot prints leading away from the campsite and down a faint slope toward the creek. The prints stop at the edge of the embankment where the soil is soft and washed clean by water. No drag marks, no split soil. Just absence. Creek Bend sits near one of the least stable sections of Silver Ridge Creek. Locals know it for its sudden floods and underground springs that can change flow overnight. The day before, rainstorms had hit the western ridge with more than 2 inches of water in less than 4 hours, enough to swell the creek and make trails impassable by morning. Reed recalls the weather clearly. A steady, drumming rain followed by thunder echoing through the valley. The next morning when he passed through, the sky had cleared just enough to reveal the mist and the campsite. That night, investigators search a 2-mile radius with lanterns and dogs. Nothing. No voices. No trace of movement. By midnight, temperatures drop below freezing, forcing the search to pause until dawn. Back at the ranger station, Burke writes the first official summary. Campsite appears abandoned during morning activity. Coffee warm. No signs of violence, forced entry, or animal presence. Possible lost hikers, but timeline inconsistent. The following morning, local newspapers print a small notice. 2 campers missing in Silver Ridge Forest. Jeep found. Site intact. Within 24 hours, the story spreads across western Montana. The unusual detail, the coffee still warm, captures attention more than anything else. People call it eerie. Others call it impossible. Families in nearby towns begin speculating about what could have happened. Some blame the terrain, flash floods or hidden ravines. Others suggest foul play, though no evidence supports it. Even experienced rangers can't agree. One claims that in Silver Ridge, you can take 2 steps off the path and vanish. By the evening of September 11th, Hannah's family in Seattle has been contacted. Her mother, Linda Cole, insists her daughter would never leave her belongings behind. She books a flight to Montana the same night. The sheriff holds a briefing at the local station, confirming that the Jeep and campsite show no sign of forced entry or theft. Nothing appears stolen. Not money, not equipment, not even their camera. Everything is simply left. Investigators make note of another oddity. The radio in the Jeep is still tuned to a local frequency that plays weather reports. The last broadcast recorded on tape, September 9th, 11:17 p.m., warned of heavy rainfall and rising creek levels. By the end of the day, the site is fully documented and sealed off. The rain continues to fall in intervals, washing away what little trace remains. The press begins referring to the case by a single name: the vanishing campers of Silver Ridge. Sheriff Burke remains cautious, but intrigued. He tells reporters, "If this was an accident, we'll find them. If it wasn't, the forest will give up its secret eventually." For now, all they have is an abandoned campsite, a locked Jeep, and 2 missing names on a camping permit. The wilderness around Silver Ridge holds no answers. Only questions, buried beneath the rain. The first search will begin the following morning, as dawn breaks over the Bitterroot Range. But even then, no one knows that it will take 16 years, 3 investigators, and one mother's refusal to quit before Silver Ridge finally speaks. September 11th, 1981, the morning after the discovery. Ravalli County deputies and forest rangers returned to the Silver Ridge campsite with one goal: figure out whether this is a disappearance, an accident, or something darker. The rain has stopped, but the ground is slick and soft. Everything that could have held a footprint is already half erased. Inside the Jeep Wagoneer, they find order. Too much order. Ethan's backpack sits in the back, zipped and packed. Extra clothes, rolls of undeveloped film, a food container still sealed. In the glove box, a spare set of keys. Nothing stolen, nothing forced. In the map pocket on the passenger door, a detailed trail map of Silver Ridge marked in red ink. The line tracing along Creek Bend Trail, the same route that runs closest to the water. It's clear they weren't planning to go far. On the front seat lies a park brochure folded neatly, and a thermos cap rolled under the floor mat. There's no sign they left in a hurry. If anything, it looks like they intended to return. Investigators move to the tent area. The stakes are still in the ground, ropes tight, but the tent fabric itself is gone. No rips, no cuts, no drag marks. It's just missing. The ground beneath is flattened, dry compared to the rest of the site, suggesting it was taken before the rain. Nearby, a pair of hiking shoes belonging to Hannah are lined up beside her small day pack. Inside the pack, a few snack bars, a compass, and her leather field journal wrapped in a folded rain jacket. When officers open it, they find her handwriting from 2 nights before. The sound of water moved closer last night. Might be the stream changing course. The note stops there. The ink smudged slightly, as if she'd closed the book before it dried. That single line catches Sheriff Raymond Burke's attention. The first hint that nature itself might play a role in this case. As they comb through the camp, the silence feels heavy. No overturned mugs, no broken equipment, not even an animal track. Everything is neat, unnaturally neat. One deputy writes in his notes, "Feels like they stood up and disappeared." Burke, a veteran of over 20 wilderness recoveries, writes something similar in his report later that day. This scene isn't chaos, it's interruption, like they were about to return. The search team widens its circle. Just beyond the tree line, about 30 yards from the camp, they find a single metal mug lying in the mud, splashed with silt, but showing no fingerprints. Near the fire pit, a short piece of nylon rope, about 2 feet long, lies half buried in wet dirt, frayed cleanly at one end. It doesn't look cut. It looks snapped. Deputies collect soil samples and photograph every angle. They note that despite the rain, no objects have drifted far. The forest floor is undisturbed except for a few shallow footprints that stop abruptly at the slope toward the creek. The prints match the boot sizes of Hannah and Ethan. None go beyond the embankment. That's where they notice something odd. Patches of mud that look churned. not by footsteps but by rushing water. The soil near the edge is darker, compacted, like something heavy pressed against it before being washed away. Burke kneels down, touches the ground, and says quietly, "This isn't normal erosion." Around noon, a fisherman named Earl Matheson comes forward. He tells deputies that the night before, around 10 p.m., he saw a flicker of light, a flashlight beam, moving near the Creek Bend crossing, about half a mile downstream from the campsite. He assumed it was just another group of campers, but now he's not sure. "It was raining hard," he says. "Could have been lightning, could have been them." His statement becomes the only possible sighting that night. By mid-afternoon, the search team finishes logging evidence. No blood, no signs of struggle, no tire tracks other than the Jeep's. The ranger post confirms that no other campers were registered at Creek Bend that week. The whole forest, for miles, was empty, except for Hannah and Ethan. The sheriff calls in a hydrology specialist from the local university to check the creek's water levels, but they'll need more time. For now, the working theory is simple and unsatisfying. They may have gone to check the stream early in the morning, slipped, or been caught by a current. But there's one major problem. The coffee pot on the table was still warm when Ranger Daniel Reed arrived. That narrows the window dramatically. If an accident happened, it had to be within 30 to 45 minutes of his discovery. Burke knows that doesn't make sense. The rain had eased off hours earlier, and the creek hadn't yet reached flood conditions. It's too soon for a flash flood, too clean for a struggle, too deliberate for an escape. The investigation shifts focus. Deputies sweep the area for personal items, wallets, cameras, IDs. Everything is accounted for. Ethan's camera bag is full, film unprocessed. There's no sign either of them tried to leave by vehicle or trail. Their camping permit remains tacked to the post, soaked through but legible. That evening, Sheriff Burke meets with the county press. His statement is short. 2 registered campers, Hannah Cole and Ethan Price, are missing from the Silver Ridge area. No signs of foul play at this time, but circumstances are unusual. By nightfall, the case reaches local radio. Couple missing in Bitterroot Range, campsite intact. The wording catches attention. As the day ends, he gives one final order. Expand the search before the next storm hits. At 6 a.m. the next morning, a 7-mile radius will be swept by 18 men, police, rangers, and volunteers, divided into 3 teams: North Trail, Creek Bend, and Devil's Spine, the steepest route in the range. The first official search for Hannah and Ethan will begin with that sunrise, and though no one knows it yet, it will last far longer than anyone expects. September 12, 1981. The first official search for Hannah Cole and Ethan Price begins at dawn. The temperature hovers in the mid-40s, the air wet and heavy with mist. The forest at Silver Ridge is silent except for the sound of dripping leaves and the low hum from the creek below. Sheriff Raymond Burke stands at the center of the operation, clipboard in hand, dividing the 18-person search team into 3 groups. The first, North Trail, will move toward the higher ridges. The second, Creek Bend, will follow the main water line. The third, Devil's Spine, will take on the steep rock face that borders the canyon. They're armed with radios, flashlights, and topographic maps printed years earlier. No helicopter support, bad weather, and limited funding shut that down before it even started. The rain from the night before has turned the ground to slick mud. Visibility drops to less than 200 meters in the fog. Every few minutes, radios crackle and fade. The mountain walls eat the signal. Burke calls it a blind search, where instinct means more than instruments. The teams move out in pairs, each tethered by rope for safety. By mid-morning, the Creek Bend team spots something, an impression in the mud about 2 miles east of the campsite. A single footprint, shallow but clear enough to measure. Men's size 10, matching Ethan's boots. It points southeast toward the river bend, then disappears. Nearby, churned-up soil marks where water once rushed through. It's the first and only physical clue they'll find that day. As the hours drag on, the weather tightens its grip. Wind cuts through the trees. That evening, Burke writes his first field summary. Area searched, 7 miles. Findings, minimal. Environment, unstable. Next steps, expand perimeter. He knows they'll need more people, and he knows what's coming. The storm clouds over the ridge promise another round of rain. The next day, they're joined by someone new. Linda Cole, Hannah's mother, flies in from Seattle and drives straight to the command post. She's calm but direct, the kind of person who doesn't wait for permission. She asks about helicopters, rescue dogs, satellite maps. Burke tells her the truth. There's no budget for any of it. The department can barely afford fuel for the trucks. Linda doesn't argue. Instead, she puts up a notice at the Hamilton General Store, offering $500 to anyone willing to help her search privately. Within hours, 3 locals volunteer, 2 hikers and a retired forest guide. The next night, the rain returns. Light at first, then steady. By midnight, it becomes a downpour. The radios fail completely. The Creek Bend team tries to push through the lower valley, but the trail collapses under runoff. One rescuer slips and fractures his leg, forcing an early retreat. The following morning, the temperature drops below 40 degrees. Searchers' boots freeze in the mud. Visibility is down to almost nothing. 5 days in, they have covered more than 20 square miles. No movement, no sound. Not a single personal item recovered. The Creek Bend report that week includes one chilling line. No signs of wildlife, no human noise, only water. On September 17th, the first search phase ends. The men return to base cold, soaked, and silent. Burke calls for a full debrief in the ranger cabin. The teams lay out their notes, every lead dead, every direction closing in on itself. A faint mark in the mud, an old fire pit, a few broken branches. Nothing ties together. The forest, as Burke puts it, gave nothing back. That same day, the Bitterroot Chronicle publishes its first article. 2 campers lost in the wild. The forest keeps its secret. Within hours, the story spreads across state lines. Volunteers begin calling the station, most offering help, some claiming visions or dreams. A few suggest that Ethan and Hannah ran away together. Burke dismisses it, but the rumor catches traction anyway. Linda Cole refuses to stay quiet. When a reporter asks whether her daughter might have chosen to disappear, she answers sharply, "My daughter wrote everything down. Every mile, every thought. She didn't plan to vanish. She planned to come home." The weather worsens again near the end of the week. The air turns colder. Snow dusts the higher ridges. On the morning of September 18th, Burke gathers the teams one last time. They've searched every marked trail, every ridge, every bend of the creek. Supplies are nearly gone. He makes the hardest call of his career, suspending the search. At the afternoon press briefing, he reads a single sentence to the crowd. "We searched every trail, every ridge, every bend in the creek, and the mountain gave nothing back. The microphones fall silent afterward. The phrase makes the next day's headline. The mountain gave nothing back becomes the line everyone remembers. By the end of September, the case is labeled an active missing persons investigation, but with no physical evidence to move forward. Officially, the leading theory is an accidental fall or local flash flood, unconfirmed but convenient. The paperwork closes with a dry note. No further action pending new evidence. Unofficially, Linda Cole begins her own operation. She rents a room in Hamilton, coordinates with hunters, guides, and former rangers. "I'll leave," she tells Burke, "when the forest tells me where they went." Burke doesn't argue. He knows she won't leave at all. The first search phase ends with exhaustion, frustration, and silence. The woods return to stillness, but the mystery only deepens. In the next chapter, winter arrives, and with it, the point where hope and determination begin to collide. If you're following the Silver Ridge case, make sure to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. What do you think really happened out there before the storm came? Late September 1981 brought an early snow to Montana. The Bitterroot Mountains turned white overnight, and the narrow roads leading to Silver Ridge froze solid. Nighttime temperatures dropped below 20 degrees. What had been a fall search turned into a winter standoff. After 3 straight weeks of combing through the forest, the official search for Hannah Cole and Ethan Price came to a stop. By the time Sheriff Raymond Burke filed his final field report, every ranger and volunteer was exhausted. His conclusion was brief. No evidence of foul play. Likely accidental fall or water-related incident. The case was marked active, suspended due to weather. The words were procedural, but everyone knew what they meant. The forest had swallowed its own story. Reporters came to Hamilton, the nearest town, hoping for one more headline before winter shut them out. Most left when the blizzard rolled in. Linda Cole, Hannah's mother, stayed. Standing outside the ranger cabin, snow collecting on her coat, she told a local journalist, "If the snow takes the mountain, I'll wait until it gives it back." It wasn't a quote meant for effect, it was a plan. Within days, Linda began forming her own team. She found help among veterans, mountain guides, and locals who refused to let the case fade. They set up a small base in Hamilton, 30 miles from the forest. From there, they printed flyers, mapped riverbeds, and organized weekend searches. Linda offered a $5,000 reward for any verified information about her daughter or Ethan. Posters went up in grocery stores, post offices, and college campuses from Missoula to Spokane. By November, the story reached regional television. KRTV Montana News aired a segment titled "The Vanishing Campers of Silver Ridge," followed by a national feature on America's Missing. Hundreds of letters poured in. People claimed to have seen a young couple hitchhiking in Idaho, a woman matching Hannah's description at a diner in Wyoming, even 2 hikers near Glacier Park. None of it checked out. Every lead ended in the same place, nowhere near Silver Ridge. While the public followed the case from afar, Linda kept the focus on the mountain. Her calls to the sheriff's office became routine. Each time the answer was the same. No new evidence, no new direction. The official line remained that Hannah and Ethan had likely fallen into a river or crevice after heavy rain. Linda disagreed. She'd studied the terrain maps herself. "You don't lose 2 people with that much experience without a trace," she told the Bitterroot Chronicle. The other family involved, the Prices in Seattle, chose silence. They declined interviews, avoided public statements, and never joined Linda's private searches. A few papers hinted at tension between the 2 families, but Linda ignored it. "I don't need agreement," she said when pressed. "I need answers." Winter deepened. Most volunteers quit when the snow blocked the trails. By January 1982, the official rescue logs recorded no activity for 6 weeks. But Linda stayed. With 2 local men, she began checking the lower creek beds once the ice began to melt that spring. They used old topographic maps, binoculars, and a metal detector that barely worked. They found fragments of bone and fabric, all confirmed as animal remains. Still, they kept going. By early summer, the sheriff's department closed the file for good. On June 4, 1982, Burke called Linda to tell her the case was being reclassified as an unresolved disappearance. She didn't raise her voice. She only said, "Then I'll keep it open myself," and hung up. The community around Hamilton began to rally behind her. On July 10th, a small candlelight service was held at the local church. Just 32 people, mostly residents and former searchers. Someone placed a wooden plaque by Creek Bend Trail that read, "For Hannah and Ethan, may the mountains show mercy." For weeks afterward, hikers reported hearing faint whistles echoing through the forest, remnants of the search team's calls carried by the wind. By the next year, Linda had become something of a legend. Newspapers called her the woman who wouldn't leave. She appeared in a 1983 documentary segment titled Mothers of the Missing, sitting by her Jeep outside the Silver Ridge access road. Her tone was calm, almost matter-of-fact. When asked why she kept coming back, she said, "Because silence is worse than grief." For 15 years, Linda returned every summer. She partnered with new volunteers, sometimes just 2 or 3 people willing to hike the same ridges she'd memorized. Together, they searched Creek Bend, Devil's Spine, and later the hilly edges near Raven's Gorge. Each year ended the same way, with empty hands and colder nights. Yet every spring she packed her gear again and drove north from Seattle. By the mid-1980s, the Silver Ridge disappearance had become one of Montana's most infamous cold cases. The sheriff's department included it in their 5-year report under a single note: "Family continues independent search." The case's lack of closure made it a favorite topic for radio hosts and crime magazines. To most people, it was a mystery that had simply faded into snow. To Linda, it was unfinished business. In late 1982, after another season of fruitless searching, Burke resigned as sheriff. Before leaving office, he spoke privately to a local reporter. "Some cases don't end. They just stop. And this one stopped too soon." By then, Silver Ridge was quiet again. The search paths were buried under new growth, and the last rescue flags had been torn down by wind. Yet Linda stayed until the final storm of that winter, standing at the same clearing where her daughter's camp once stood. She looked toward the frozen ridge and said quietly, "If the mountain took them, I'll make sure it remembers." When spring came, she returned once more, alone. The official record would show that the search had ended. But for Linda Cole, it had only just begun. 15 years after the campsite coffee went cold, Montana tried again. In 1995, the state launched the Cold Trails Initiative, a push to reopen unsolved disappearances with new tools and fresh eyes. The Silver Ridge file made the first cut. It had something most old cases didn't: organized notes, clear photographs, and a timeline that never lost its shape. The assignment landed on Michael Grant's desk. He was 38, a state investigator who came up through the evidence unit, comfortable with mud samples and map layers, and known for treating wilderness scenes like crime scenes. even when no crime was proven. Grant began the hard way, page by page. He read over 400 pages of reports and logged every photograph from the 1981 search, naming each by trail, compass bearing, and time of day. What jumped out wasn't what the team had found, it was what they hadn't measured. No soil cores, no flow rates, not a single topo overlay that matched the campsite to seasonal flood paths. He circled the same line in the old summary 3 times. No evidence of foul play. Then he wrote his own note in the margin. This is about the land. The small details started pulling at him. Hannah Cole's notebook entries near the end of the trip, short, practical observations, kept returning to sound and smell. The creek sounds closer. Wet earth stronger tonight. The water moved last night. We might shift the tent tomorrow. None of it read like fear. It read like attention. In Grant's view, those lines weren't color. They were data. You could map them to a clock and a slope. 1995 was also the first year his division had access to early GIS in the field office. It wasn't sleek software, but it let him layer a digital elevation model over the Bitterroot foothills and draw potential water routes the way a surveyor would. He pulled rainfall records from the National Weather Service archives and overlaid totals for September 9, 1981. The numbers were blunt. The heaviest overnight rain event in roughly 2 decades, with totals 4 times the local threshold for nuisance flooding. On the DEM, the Creek Bend campground sat inside a shallow bowl shaped by minor tributaries and buried runs of the creek, a place that looked safe on a dry morning and precarious when the ground saturated. Grant wrote a working note he repeated to colleagues. This was never a story about running away. It was about the land shifting under them. He needed a scientist to push or break the theory. He called Dr. Laura Peterson at the University of Montana, a hydrologist who kept a low profile and a detailed memory of the Bitterroot. She had studied how creeks briefly change course during extreme weather, then return to a mean path that makes yesterday's flood invisible. At his request, she reviewed the 1981 weather sets and older geology notes on Silver Ridge Creek and the gorge system to the east. Her response was simple and specific. There's geological evidence of an underground surge that year. The terrain literally moved. With that, the file opened to the one witness who had never left, Linda Cole, Hannah's mother. Now in her early 60s, she walked into the Helena office with 3 cardboard boxes and a spiral notebook she'd been adding to for a decade and a half. In the boxes were duplicate maps, copies of the original permit, notes from calls she made to rangers, her own photographs of creek bends taken year after year from the same angles. Grant watched her lay it all out by date. She had done half the detective work before we even reopened it, he told the team later. He wasn't exaggerating. Her labeled snapshots of the creek bank beside the campground showed how the water line shifted after heavy seasons. It wasn't proof, but it was direction. They moved to the field. In August 1995, Grant and Peterson organized a small survey team. 3 geologists, 2 GPS techs, and 1 evidence photographer. Early GPS units were slow, but better than guessing. They paced the old search sectors and marked the 1981 campsite, the vehicle pad, the last confirmed footprints, and the pathways the original teams used. Then they walked the creek, not as hikers but as auditors. A cable camera went into undercut banks and tight pockets where a hand couldn't reach. They noted scouring, sand deposits out of place, small wood jams that suggested earlier force. Little by little, a picture built. The creek had likely left its bed that week, borrowed a shallow channel, and slipped back. 3 days in, they dropped below Creek Bend. The water was lower than in September of '81, exposing roots and snag lines. A tech called Grant over to a tangle of alder against a ledge 6 feet above the current. There, wedged into the roots, was a strip of fabric, weathered, pale blue, and surprisingly tough under the mud. The photographer shot scale, then close-ups. Grant took the tweezers and freed it in one piece. It looked like tent nylon. Not just any nylon. The grain and weight matched what outdoor catalogs from the early '80s called expedition grade. Linda stood back as the team bagged it, then said, quiet but certain, that she had bought Hannah a 2-person North Peak tent the month before the trip at the REI in Seattle. Grant didn't allow himself to nod. He told the team to treat it like what it was, the first physical clue in 15 years. Back in Helena, the lab took fiber samples and compared them to known materials from that period. They found silt packed into the weave, fine particles, organic bits, the kind of mix you see in fast water rather than slow seep. No cut marks, no heat damage. The tear pattern ran with the fibers, uneven and pulled, the way material fails when it's stretched and twisted at speed. The technicians couldn't confirm a serial number from the remnant, but the spectrum analysis fit North Peak's 1981 line more closely than other common brands. The lab memo was careful, but it didn't hedge on one point. What tore the nylon wasn't a blade. It was force. Grant added the result to his growing matrix: storm totals, slope angles, Hannah's notes, the missing tent fly from the original scene sketch, and now a piece of nylon that most likely came from a tent like hers, found downstream and above the current line as if hung there during higher water. He compared the alder tangle's elevation to the DEM and marked how far the creek would need to rise to reach that point. The numbers landed in the same range as the 1981 rain event. The shape of the case tightened. He called an internal meeting and put it in plain language. Environmental cause likely. Flash flood or sudden ground collapse near the creek bed. No speeches, no drama, just next steps. He proposed a formal hydrology reconstruction, pulling rain and stream data from every Montana station that could fill gaps in the old record, and a targeted resurvey of the lower creek the following season when snowmelt had passed. The request was unusual, building a cause of disappearance around terrain rather than intent, but the program had been created for unusual cases. The file tone changed outside the room. Word got out that Silver Ridge was moving under the Cold Trails program. A regional paper ran a short profile calling Grant the investigator who listens to the land. He didn't like it, but he liked the attention on the work. Asked for comment, Linda gave a sentence that cut through the noise. If the truth is in the river, we'll find it there. Grant returned one more time to the 1981 inventory. The tent poles had been recorded as missing. The fly had been recorded as missing. The season closed before the team could push deeper. Snow would come early in the Bitterroot. Grant wrote the next plan, requested additional data pulls from the weather archives, and secured a tentative window the following spring to extend the survey beyond Creek Bend. He didn't promise answers. He didn't need to. On his desk sat proof that the story hadn't ended at a picnic table with warm coffee. It had continued downstream, torn, carried, and caught. This chapter stops with the recovery of that nylon, one piece of a shelter that likely rose and failed when the creek did. It is not a conclusion, but it is a turn. For the first time since 1981, the case had a physical line to follow. The mountain had stayed quiet. The water had not. May 1996. The first warm stretch of the Montana spring broke through weeks of snowmelt, and for the first time in 15 years, the Silver Ridge investigation returned to the mountains. Michael Grant's team had spent the winter studying maps, digital elevation models, and the strange rainfall data from 1981. Now they were back on the ground. The search radius pushed 6 miles east of the original site, toward a narrow cut in the terrain known to locals as Raven's Gorge, a 90-foot deep chasm carved by a side stream of Silver Ridge Creek. Few people ever went there. There were no trails, no markers, and no reason to climb into a slot that swallowed sound and sunlight alike. The team was small. Grant, Dr. Laura Peterson, 2 geologists, 2 GPS specialists, and a field photographer. Their gear looked different from what searchers carried in '81. Laser depth gauges, nylon safety lines, and an industrial cable camera meant for pipeline work. The air was sharp and dry, the snowpack thinning. Each step down the slope slid a few inches on gravel. Peterson warned that the rock faces on either side were nearly vertical, and that once they reached the gorge floor, radio contact would be patchy at best. Every movement had to be controlled, 10 feet per minute. No shortcuts. They began lowering the cable camera early in the morning. At 10:20 a.m., the video feed caught a glint between the roots of a cottonwood that had grown out of the cliff wall. The light shifted with the water. Something reflective wedged halfway up from the stream. Grant ordered the rig to pause and zoom. The lens showed a sheet of blue material twisted around stone, torn along the grain, still strong enough to resist 15 years of current. When they hauled it up, it felt heavy with silt. Under the mud, the color showed through. Faded sky blue. Nylon. It matched exactly the North Peak 2-person tent model sold in 1981. Near the same spot, one of the geologists picked up a short piece of bent aluminum lodged in debris. It was tubular, lightweight, and crushed in the middle, consistent with a tent pole. They marked the coordinates and photographed everything against a survey board. The GPS reading placed the find 5.8 miles east of the original campsite, directly along the natural drainage line that would have carried floodwater from Creek Bend into the gorge. Peterson studied the debris marks on the rock wall, thin streaks of silt reaching 7 feet above the current level. "That wasn't steady flow," she said. "That was a surge." Back in Helena, the forensic lab treated the items like new evidence. The nylon was cleaned, dried, and examined under spectrum analysis. The fiber composition, polyamide with a specific dye ratio, matched the North Peak brand sample that Linda Cole produced from an old receipt. And recovered material from Raven's Gorge strongly supports natural disaster hypothesis. Human foul play remains unsupported by any physical evidence. For the first time since 1981, the Silver Ridge case had something tangible, objects that had lived through whatever happened. The investigation pivoted. The official theory shifted from abduction or homicide to environmental catastrophe. News spread fast. On May 20th, 1996, the Montana Tribune ran the headline. "Evidence emerges in Silver Ridge mystery. Storm may have taken the campers." Television crews from Missoula and Billings showed up at the state lab, filming the evidence sealed in transparent sleeves. Reporters dubbed it the Raven's Gorge evidence. Grant, standing outside under flat light, refused to speculate. "We're following the science now," he said, and went back inside. That same evening, Linda Cole drove from Seattle to Helena. When Grant met her in the evidence room, she asked to see the fabric. It lay inside a clear case, folded once, the color dulled by age. She leaned close, fingertips against the glass. "That's it," she said quietly. "That's the one she picked because it was light and kept the rain out." No tears, no drama, just confirmation. To a reporter from KRTV who caught her in the hallway, she said, "For 15 years I've been waiting for the forest to speak. Maybe this is it." Asked if this meant closure, she paused. "At least now I know she wasn't left in the dark." The scientific response came almost as fast as the media. Peterson and Grant presented preliminary findings to the State Environmental Office, recommending a hydrological reconstruction of the 1981 storm. The Weather Service agreed to share archived data. For researchers, it was a rare opportunity, a long unsolved disappearance that might be solved by topography instead of confession. The Bitterroot Range had always been prone to sudden microbursts, but there had never been a documented case of campers lost entirely to flash flooding. If proven, it could redefine how wilderness investigations handled storm risk. Within the team, the story ends this chapter there, in the windless air above Raven's Gorge, Grant and Peterson looking down at the water still cutting through the same narrow throat of rock. The camera cables coiled beside them, the nylon sealed in its case. The mountains were silent again, but this time they had finally answered. By late summer of 1996, the Silver Ridge case was no longer a mystery of missing hikers. It was a question of physics, terrain, and time. Investigator Michael Grant and hydrologist Dr. Laura Peterson returned to Montana with a clear goal: to test whether nature itself, not a human hand, had erased Hannah Cole and Ethan Price 15 years earlier. The team rebuilt the past using numbers instead of guesses. They gathered archived rainfall logs from September 7th through 10th, 1981, scanned old U.S. Geological Survey maps, and generated a primitive digital elevation model of the Silver Ridge Basin. Soil and rock samples from Raven's Gorge and Creek Bend were cataloged, and even Hannah's journal notes about the water sounding closer were treated as data points. From the beginning, the question was simple: could the land itself explain their disappearance? They loaded everything into an early hydrology simulation, the kind of software used for flood insurance mapping, not cold cases. Grant's input file covered 10 square kilometers of terrain, with infiltration curves for late-season mountain soil and roughness coefficients for the dense fir and alder forest. Then they overlaid the rainfall records from the National Weather Service. The data showed one brief, violent cell passing over the Bitterroot Range just after midnight on September 9th, an isolated downpour strong enough to count as a 20-year storm for that tiny watershed. The model output was immediate and startling. In less than 40 minutes, Silver Ridge Creek's water level spiked almost 9 feet. The east bank overflowed, creating a temporary channel that spilled into the narrow feeder leading toward Raven's Gorge. That path, now plotted in digital blue lines, matched perfectly with the debris coordinates where the torn tent nylon had been found the year before. On the screen, the flood looked like a hand sweeping across the map, pushing everything downhill in a single violent surge. Dr. Peterson broke the results down further. The peak flow velocity, roughly 25 feet per second, was more than enough to carry lightweight camping gear, aluminum poles, and even a person unable to gain footing on slick rock. The simulated debris line rose to between 7 and 8 feet high inside the gorge, the same height as the scars still visible on tree bark when they returned to check the site. They walked that route themselves, moving carefully through the overgrowth. The forest had regrown, but the marks were still there. Roots stripped bare, stones polished clean by a long-ago torrent. Under the canopy, they used rope lines instead of drones to photograph what remained. Every ridge, every slope break, matched the model's predicted overflow path. Peterson's notes summed it up. The terrain doesn't lie. This flow happened. Back at the lab, Grant ran control tests, changing soil saturation and slope roughness to see if the flood could vanish under different assumptions. It never did. No matter the parameters, the gorge always received a short, violent surge consistent with the evidence. The only way to remove it was to input unrealistically dry soil or rainfall below historical records. Both options impossible given what had been logged in 1981. The data had closed the circle. They compared the findings with the physical damage on the tent material. The tear pattern matched what hydrodynamic stress would cause when fabric is stretched and ripped by fast water. The aluminum pole, crushed and twisted, bore no tool marks, no cuts, no signs of deliberate force. The physics ruled out human action completely. Grant wrote in his report, "No model consistent with observed debris requires interference. The event is natural in every replicable scenario." The team added one more layer, cross-checking witness testimony. The fisherman who'd reported seeing a flashlight near Creek Bend around 10 p.m. on the night of September 9th had been doubted for years. But when his position was mapped, it lined up with the period before the modeled surge, when the campers might have been awake and preparing to move away from the rising creek. It was the final piece that made sense. They hadn't vanished by choice or by crime. They had been caught between the sound of rising water and the speed of what followed. Grant's official summary, filed under Silver Ridge Reassessment, 1996-97, read, "Accidental exposure to a flash flood surge following an extreme rainfall cell. Probable attempt to relocate uphill intersected the feeder to Raven's Gorge. Victims likely carried downstream." Before anything went public, he met privately with Linda Cole. She listened without interrupting as Grant explained the findings, the rainfall model, the terrain paths, and the evidence that ruled out foul play. When he finished, she nodded once and said, "So it was the flood. It wasn't anyone's choice." Her words became the tone for the announcement that followed. The official press release focused on the science, not speculation. For the first time, the state told the public that the Silver Ridge disappearance had a logical, measurable explanation. Local news described it as a rare case of technology bringing truth to an old mystery. National outlets picked up the story under headlines like, "Flash Flood Theory May Solve 1981 Montana Vanishing." The investigation closed this phase with more than just answers. Grant's team recommended that the Forest Service begin issuing flash flood warnings for backcountry campsites near seasonal creeks, and that no permits be granted for areas within overflow corridors like Creek Bend. In Helena, his closing line to colleagues summed up the shift in tone. "We can't control the mountains, but now at least we understand what they did." The Silver Ridge case had moved from silence to science, and as the model projection overlaid perfectly with the map of the recovered debris, Grant stared at the screen for a long moment. Not in triumph, but in recognition. The mystery that had haunted Montana for 15 years now had a shape, a cause, and a story the evidence could finally tell. By the spring of 1997, the Silver Ridge investigation had become something larger than a cold case. It was now a landmark in forensic science and human persistence, Almost a year had passed since the hydrology model confirmed that the flash flood theory was not speculation but fact. Still, Montana's mountains hadn't given up a single body. People across the state wondered if the wilderness would ever return anything at all. On April 9, 1997, a team of 4 amateur hikers from Missoula headed into the lower basin of Silver Ridge Creek. They were weekend explorers, following the public topographic maps released after the investigation. Around 2 days later, investigators from the Montana Department of Investigation arrived and collected the sleeping bag under strict evidence protocol. Back at the Helena Forensic Unit, analysts performed a full material scan. The fabric's chemical profile contained an early waterproof coating, PFC compounds produced only between 1980 and 1982. It matched the specifications of the North Peak model Hannah Cole had purchased in Seattle before the trip. Within the same search area, officers also recovered a small silver ring, half buried in sediment. On the inside band, barely visible under the corrosion, were the letters E plus H. Linda Cole later confirmed that her daughter and Ethan had worn identical rings, a simple personal engraving from a local jeweler in 1981. No DNA could be retrieved, but there was no doubt where these items came from. After 16 years, Silver Ridge had finally returned something. In July 1997, the Montana Department of Investigation released its final report. The conclusion was concise and formal. Accidental death due to flash flood, bodies unrecovered. The case was officially marked closed, scientific resolution. It was the first time in state history that a disappearance had been solved using environmental forensics and hydrologic modeling, rather than witness testimony or confession. For many, it symbolized how science could explain what emotion could not. When Linda Cole was notified, she requested to view the recovered items herself. In Helena, she stood quietly over the evidence table, the torn sleeping bag, the ring, the small envelope of silt that had been sealed for testing. She asked to keep a small square of the fabric, the part where the blue color was still faintly visible under the lab lights. Later, she framed it and hung it by her kitchen window, the same spot where Hannah used to sit and study as a teenager. When a reporter asked her what closure felt like, she answered softly, "It's not peace, but it's truth. And sometimes, that's the best you can ask for." By autumn, the story reached national television. The program Cold Cases Revisit aired a full episode titled The Vanishing. In October 1997, the state dedicated a small memorial at the entrance of Silver Ridge Trailhead. The bronze plaque read, "In memory of Hannah and Ethan, lost but found in spirit." Beneath it, etched in smaller text, was a line taken from Hannah's final journal. "The forest keeps its secrets. Maybe that's part of its beauty." At the ceremony, under the thin autumn light, townspeople, park rangers, and former search volunteers gathered. Some had aged into retirement since the original investigation. Linda Cole spoke briefly, her voice steady. "They came here to live with nature," she said, "and nature took them home." Those words settled over the crowd. Not tragic, just final. The legacy of the case extended beyond emotion. In the following year, the state implemented a mountain weather alert system across western Montana, providing automatic warnings for flash flood risk in wilderness camping areas. The Forest Service revised its backcountry permit policies, requiring safety briefings and updated maps for high-risk creek zones. Silver Ridge, once known for its mystery, became a teaching ground for environmental safety and scientific reconstruction. The artifacts, the tent scrap, the sleeping bag, and the silver ring, were later placed in the Montana Missing Persons exhibit in Helena. The display stood behind glass labeled simply, "Recovered Evidence from the Silver Ridge Case, 1981 to 1997. For visitors, it wasn't a shrine, but a reminder that even long, cold stories can still yield the truth. By the end of that year, the file was sealed for the last time. For Montana, the case was closed. For Linda Cole, the closure wasn't the end. It was a quiet understanding that her daughter's story had finally reached solid ground. The mountains hadn't betrayed her faith. They had simply waited until the right tools, the right people, and the right moment arrived to tell the truth. By 1998, the mystery of Silver Ridge was no longer a case file. It was a case study. After the final report and the national broadcast on Cold Cases Revisited, the story spread through universities, newsrooms, and police departments across the country. What began as a disappearance had become a symbol of what patience, data, and persistence could uncover. The Montana Department of Investigation hosted a symposium called Science and Search, where investigators, hydrologists, and geologists gathered to discuss the lessons learned. When asked what made the difference, Michael Grant said simply, "It wasn't luck. It was patience, data, and the refusal to stop asking questions." After the case closed, Linda Cole founded the Silver Ridge Foundation, a nonprofit devoted to helping families of the missing, especially those lost in wilderness areas. Her mission was practical and clear: provide emotional support to families, train civilian search volunteers, and strengthen cooperation between law enforcement and environmental experts. Within 5 years, her foundation expanded to 4 western states, supported by both public funds and environmental grants. At a fundraiser in 2000, Linda stood before a small crowd and said, "I couldn't bring my daughter home, but I can make sure no one else has to wait 15 years for answers." It was the moment she turned her loss into something that saved others from the same silence. Michael Grant left the Montana Bureau of Investigation in 1999 and began teaching at the University of Montana. His field, environmental forensic science, was new then, but he helped shape it into a discipline that merged geoscience and criminal investigation. He developed a method called geoforensic reconstruction, combining terrain modeling, rainfall analysis, and satellite data to retrace events in remote areas. In 2002, he published The Land Remembers: Lessons from the Silver Ridge Case, which became a foundational text in environmental forensics. In its opening pages, he wrote, "Truth doesn't always bring peace, but it brings understanding, and that's enough to move forward." The case's influence reached beyond classrooms. Montana's Forest Service adopted new safety protocols. Flood sensors and automated warning systems were installed along 30 high-risk streams. Anyone seeking a backcountry camping permit was now required to attend a short safety orientation. By 2001, the National Outdoor Safety Board cited Silver Ridge as the case that turned tragedy into prevention. Every September, a small memorial conference is still held at Silver Ridge, where families of missing hikers and scientists gather to share new methods and remember why they search. In media and public memory, Silver Ridge became a touchstone, True crime documentaries, podcasts, and lectures cited it as the purest example of resolution without recovery. Over time, what endured was not the tragedy, but the philosophy behind it. The Silver Ridge vanishing reminded people that truth doesn't erase pain, it explains it. It showed that science could bring meaning to loss, and that understanding could be its own kind of peace. At a 2005 lecture, Grant summarized it best. The wilderness doesn't erase people. It holds them until someone learns how to read the land. Years later, the plaque at the Silver Ridge trailhead still stands under the shadow of the Bitterroot Mountains. The metal has faded, but the words remain clear. They came to explore the wild and became part of it forever. If you've followed this story to the end, tell me, do you believe every mystery deserves an answer, even when it comes too late? Leave your thoughts in the comments below.